Okay, so hey everyone, hello and welcome to Kotlin Mumbai. Thank you for taking out time on the Saturday. We are going to have great learning on some bits of backend engineering with Kotlin today. So welcome to our August 2021 meetup. Before we go into the entire session, a little bit about our community. We are an open community for developers, right? We love Kotlin and we are a Kotlin focused community. We primarily focus on building Android applications with Kotlin and other tech that Kotlin is used in. Uh, yeah, there was some noise from somebody's end. Yeah. So from this year entirely and from the last year, we have been fully online. So, we haven't had physical meetups due to the pandemic, of course. And we do intend to staying fully online since we have gathered a lot of communities, folks from not just from Mumbai, but all around India and all around the world. So we're a fully online community. And I want to talk more about like connecting with us. So if you want to check out more about the community, here are our links. We are present on almost all social media. You just find Kotlin Mumbai and you will find us there, and you can ping to any one of us organizers if you have any queries. If you would like to see us do more stuff, feel free to reach out to us. A little bit more on our code of conduct, which is before we init, right, our init block for today's session. So just code of conduct, I mean, we want to try to stay civil, we want to be nice to each other. So it's very fairly simple. Just be nice to each other, don't go around harassing people or saying negative things. We respect people's opinions and we want other people's opinions to be respected. We are here to learn, so that's what we are going to focus on. And few announcements, we are probably thinking of starting sessions on Clubhouse as well. So if you are into that, feel free to reach out to us again, and that's something we definitely look forward to. So that's a little bit about our community. I think today, to talk more about today's session, Shreyas, would you like to introduce Himanshu to the community?
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Adesh. So, yeah, hey everyone, welcome. And I know everyone must know about Himanshu. So, let me introduce you to the Himanshu, to the speaker. So, he's a Google developer expert in Android, and he worked on multiple domains like healthcare, rental, and gaming platform. His primary focus is on building robust architecture and make scalable apps. Apart from the Android domain, he's open and open source contributor and backend developer. And yes, he loves Kotlin. So that's a little introduction about of Himanshu. And before starting session, if in between session, if you have any questions, just go to slido.com and enter the code KTMUM, or just scan this QR code and you will be navigated to the website where you can ask questions. And yeah, that's how you can ask questions. So over to you, Himanshu. You can start sharing.
Hey, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Just let me share it. So I would not be able to see my screen. Just let me know if you are able to uh, see my presentation or something. Is it visible?
Yeah, it's visible.
Awesome. Okay, so I'll start with this. I'm very bad at preparing slides, so this is a very minimal one which you guys can see out right now. Apart from this, so I think it's also time to update my intro. It was 3 years back, which I wrote. So let's start off this. Hoping this is a Kotlin group, and which I have seen right from the ages it started. So a lot of people have already used Kotlin for Android, and now people have started adopting it for multi-platform side of it. In India, per se, Kotlin for backend has been a bit less. A lot of companies uses it, but when we see companies across the globe, I would find at least 10 big shots using it, right from Netflix to Zolando, right, Delivery Hero itself. So a lot of companies uses it. So the whole brief up about this topic was more into to get you started and help you understand why you should start backend engineering with Kotlin itself. And it's a like a plus bonus, I would say, if you know Android already. So it's more of like making your full stack. So before that, I have a very weird about me thing. I just recently started my job at Clue as an Android engineer. Apart from this, I'm also a Google developer expert for Android. And yeah, that's pretty much it. A very less side on the open source and stuff, which I was doing last year. So before anything else, let us start. So this is going to be more of an interactive one. I'm not going to speak in front of my screen again and again. So what
Himanshu,
I would,
sorry to
yeah,
pause. I think you are stuck on the first slide. So are you presenting full screen or how is
I'm
it?
presenting full screen. I don't know.
Yeah, we can only see your. I think it's the keynote. Entire window. That window we
Okay.
are seeing. We are not able to see the full screen one.
Now is it changing somehow?
Yeah, the slides are changing, but we can see the windowed keynote presentation, not the full screen
Okay.
presentation.
Just let me see. How do I present it? Let me now. Is it visible? I'm sharing the whole desktop. Just let me know. Just let me know if you can see the changes.
Yeah, we can see it full screen now.
Yep.
That's fine.
Now
Yeah,
it's
you can continue.
We are able to see now.
Oh, okay. So I'll go with this. I would not be giving a brief. It was nothing much there. Uh, cool. So before primarily we all are Android developers here who is attending a talk, and some of them might be interested in getting started with Kotlin, or you might have seen people using Java as programming language for building stuff, right? So it was a recommended way. Like if you see in enterprises applications like the banking applications or any other stuff, everybody used to use Java. With the time being, like last 3-4 years, people have started migrating themselves from Java to Kotlin for Android and multiple stuff. Wherever it was Java, now it's Kotlin, right? I still understand a lot of companies use Java because migrating it is not possible every time. So that's a goal. But if you are starting a new thing, I would recommend not using Java and using Kotlin because of the various purposes Kotlin has and the benefits. I'm not going to deep down on that part, but I'm just going to start from that part that if you know Java or if you were using Java, a new project is already compatible with Kotlin. So apart from that, how many of you guys are actually using Kotlin in your project? It's okay if you don't want to answer, but I want to just make it more clear.
Yeah, I'm using Kotlin language. Yeah, safety here.
Awesome. And how many of you are in Java still? I know I
So,
all know the legacy code is in Java. So hello.
my current project is Java only, but I'm doing some freelancing work. In
Mm-hmm.
freelancing, I'm using Kotlin language.
Okay, cool. So it would be not wrong if I assume that a lot of the project in Android right now has been shifted towards Kotlin as an ecosystem, right? That even if you see people were excited about Flutter as a cross-platform thing, but with Kotlin multi-platform, everything has changed, right? Right from the expectations of people that Kotlin can do multi-platform stuff, Kotlin can do this, Kotlin can build desktop apps. I remember Shreyas building a whole web application using Kotlin. So okay, web is also there in a very early stage maybe, but it's still there. But Android has been the more primary one, I would say, for Kotlin, right? This is where I want to introduce you to like more on the backend side of Kotlin. So when I say the backend side of Kotlin, I'm not going to say that I'm just going to write more of a wrapper in Kotlin and use every other stuff in Java sometimes or Scala some way. What we are going to do is we are going to actually use Kotlin as our backend primary source, and let's just see how this goes out, right? This is one of my first talks in Kotlin for backend as well, so let's bear it out. Maybe we can churn out all the contents in certain ways. So why do I speak a lot about Kotlin? Like if I have to say in the backend side, so every focus, every target would be towards the backend side of it, right? So when I say this, right, Kotlin has this whole expressiveness of doing stuff. The biggest factor why Kotlin was into the picture was of the nullability issue, right? It was null safe. So it's more of an expressive language. You can scale it in whatever ways you want to. It's the most scalable thing I have worked on recently. The migrations are very easy, I would say, in that way. So anyone who might have been using Java can migrate to Kotlin, I think so. If only your team allows. Sorry. The tooling support by JetBrains is hands down the best tooling support you'll find in the whole ecosystem. Right from Kotlin, IntelliJ, Android Studio, pick one IDE and it's the best. The only competitor for good, maybe a coding ecosystem or the editor would be a VS Code. But VS Code is an editor, this is an IDE. So this gives you a full-fledged system of the whole tooling mechanism. And with JetBrains giving you that level of editing, like, what do you say, that compatibility factor, tooling has to be the best. And make note that community support of Kotlin has grown heaps and bounds like this. Understand the community support when it started in 2017 or somehow, and check it right now. So if you see it, right, everything and literally everything has been trending in Kotlin. You would see no project, nothing coming out in Java and people saying that, oh, this is my new project, please check it out. Everything goes in the Kotlin way. Every day you would see a new style of Kotlinification, I would say. Someday someone would come and say that, okay, this is my style of doing things. This is my style of doing things. And you would find both of them in a very good, proper, recommended way. So my whole point is the community is coming up saying this, okay, this was just a language, but there are a lot of patterns you can use Kotlin with. It can be like an expression. It can be multiple ways of writing expression, of clubbing multiple expression and whatnot, right? So that's there. Now, Kotlin in itself is just a programming language. To help it build a backend language or a backend core of it, it uses frameworks under the hood, right? So to give you an understanding what frameworks are, I understand framework as a booster or something like a push which helps to elongate or attach to a programming language, which gives it a superpower to build something, right? Kotlin is just a language. Now giving something to this ecosystem or the language itself and making it build something of its own. So for example, Kotlin, Android ecosystem gave them a lot of boosters, a lot of attachments, and now Kotlin is an Android framework. In the same way, if you attach something to Kotlin and you can make it on the framework side, right? Same for Java as well. It was not out of the box. It's just a language. So same for Kotlin as well. We have a lot of frameworks going around, and let's discuss one of them here, right? Spring Boot is like by far the biggest popular one. If not, it competes with Express framework of Node. It's one of the most old using ones. Kotlin supports it, yes. There is Vertex. I don't know how to pronounce it. It might be Vert.x or just Vertex. Then there is Ktor. This is one of the lightest one I have used, and we are going to talk about it later in this, but this is one of them. There is Micronauts, and I know Shreyas uses this. So if you have any questions and if you want to use Micronauts, he's your guy. And I don't know, but there are a lot of more than HTTP4K and some other frameworks as well. But to more specify on the talks or the topic which we are going to talk is Ktor, this topic. So why did I choose Ktor? And just don't mistake it for because I'm using Kotlin, the whole Ktor has been started with K. No, that's not the use case. I wouldn't define it that way, but it looks very similar to it because nowadays, even though we create any library in Kotlin, we just add a K out of it. Correct. So that's one of it. Let's not discuss that, but we are going to discuss this as a whole framework. So why did I choose Ktor as the language or more of a framework which I wanted to use with Kotlin to build my backend ecosystem? I could have chosen Spring, which is already tried and tested. I could have chosen Micronauts. I could choose Vertex. A lot of different options were there, right? But I wanted to go with Ktor as my primary source. So first, let's discuss that, right? Why? So how many of you actually uses coroutines in your project? If I can ask, and you can just reply in the chat as well. So if you want to. as far as I know, all of you, like in the Android ecosystem, people have started loving coroutines, and with Flow coming into the picture, it's just the best big thing happening, right? This is how people were excited about RxJava. It's the same level of excitement for coroutines. So it's built using coroutines. It has an internal support, so we don't have to specifically add something to it. Then it's very lightweighted. So if you remember in Android terms, right, when we pick up any library to use, there are a couple of checks which it has to pass through. Number of dex method counts, the lightweightedness of the whole library. So Ktor passes that. It's a very lightweighted framework. And this is one of the important reasons I chose it, because it is supported by JetBrains. And now I gave you a whole description why JetBrains is important, but JetBrains is like the owner or the founder, whatever you want to say for Kotlin. So if Ktor is being pushed by JetBrains, you know the whole compatibility factor, how smooth it is going to be for Ktor and Kotlin in juncture, right? So that's one of the reasons, and that's the primary reasons for me to go Ktor. Coroutines is something I love it. Lightweightedness is there, and it's backed by JetBrains, correct? Now, uh, enough of my whole history, whole technology stuff. Let's just start it and somehow. So I just give you an extension of it, how to use it, but not everything I would say, but just to make you understand, because I expect not everybody understand the backend terminology. So I'll just try my best. So there is two ways you can actually start a Ktor project. IntelliJ IDEA is by far my favorite IDE. I don't even use Android Studio anymore. I just use IntelliJ IDEA for my Android projects as well. So there's this. And there is this website called start.ktor.io. So if you go there, you can create your template of your first Ktor project. I would have to put it that way. So in IntelliJ IDEA, just don't get it out of the box. There is a plugin which you need to download. You just go and search for Ktor in the market space, and you'll get the plugin for IntelliJ IDEA. And if you don't want to use it, just go to this website of start.ktor.io, and you get to see a lot of different configurations which you need to set up, and you'll get to do it. For this whole presentation, I'll be going with IntelliJ IDEA. And as you know, it's like one of the best things. So this is how do you do it, right? On the left-hand panel, you see there's a Ktor, which I have selected. You might see Micronauts as well. Ask Shreyas again. So on the right-hand side, there are custom things which you need to actually set up. First is name. That's something I'm not going to declare or define. What's that? There's a location which I wanted to set up. So that's the location. Now, there is a website or the domain name. I would say the ones like in our project or in Android, we used to set up some domain, right? So that's the website that's being basically registered on my package unique ID. Then this artifact is like my project ID, how we used to create for Androids. The uniqueness, this is that artifact. Then we have Ktor versions, right? Ktor version is basically the versioning of which Ktor I want to use. 1.6.2 is, or 1 is, I guess, the latest one. I still use 1.6.0 because I have a much familiarity with that, and I want to use a latest version after some time, so that I'm sure that it's completely stable enough to be used, right? Then there is an engine. If you see Netty engine, there is Jetty engine. So what are engines basically? So engine is like a thrust for you, what helps you push the whole project and run it as a web application. So it's basically your leader which leads the whole project and makes you run, right? That's how you define engine. Now there is configurations, right? So you have custom variables, custom setups, which we use in how do you explain in config, like in project, right? What we do in Android is like we have a certain property files, .property files, and when we set up some configurations there which we don't want people to extract it, right? In here as well, we have a couple of things, like we can have a text file, we can have a hconf file. That's pretty fine with what configurations you want to set. And when you do this, there's an option if you want a sample code. I would always recommend having a sample code because then you don't have to write everything from scratch. And now you know what's the recommended way if you want to do it, correct? So I just selected sample code and you just go next. Now, when you go next, you have a lot of different features you want to add. So there are authentications with basic. So when you say basic, it's more or less you have your email and password set up on your project site. That there's a custom check, for example, let's say that email is equals to himanshu@himanshu.com and password is equal to 123456. That's more of like basic authentication. It's just to identify, okay, something which we know is already being authenticating it. Then there is everybody favorite JWT, right? And we have OAuth as well, which is not visible in the screen. So these are like the features you want to use, because when you set up a project, an actual working project, how would you define that? It's more like authentication to be there, database layer to be there, serialization to be there in Android. Again, if I have to relate, it's JSON, Jackson or something, right? Moshi as well. So that has to be there. Then you have to have exception handlers. These features are basically pre-built in the whole creation of the project. And don't worry if you're a bit skipping it out. I'll explain it in the further slides what this means exactly, right? So these are the project's predefined ones. What I basically select is routing, because we need the whole URL thing, routing. I select authentication if I have to, and I just go finish, right? That's what we do. And yeah, so that's like the one which we basically do. We have our setup, we select our features, and with this finish the creating a project. That's what we do, right? Now, when you do it, this is how it looks. So don't mistake this for as an Android project. It looks like it, but it's not an Android project. It's your backend project. So this plugin, if you see this folder plugin, right? This one. This plugin is nothing but the features we have selected. So when you create a temporary project, it generates with the name of plugin. Now Ktar has renamed it. What do you say this? As a feature and not routing. An application is something which is your like an application class of Android again, but again, don't mistake it. This is a Ktar project. This is my sample project which we created just now. So think in that way. Source and main contains all your files which you have to write. This is if you have to make it in a modular way, you can break it down in multiple different sets. But if you have to have a single module, right, this one mono repo thing, then everything goes under the main Kotlin, and you have the test files. So testing is very easy in this part. Now, if you remember, when we created a file of configurations, if I'm not wrong, right, that configurations goes inside the resource folder. So that's what we do. Now, just understand this. This is the project which we created, and we run it. And when we run it, and it's not a very big thing to run. It's just that you click that run button on IntelliJ IDEA and it runs. So when you run it, you see this. This is your local host running, right? So this is your URL 0000 colon. This 8080 is your port number, which is active, like on which the project is active. And this hello world is the by default version, which has been added by the sample projects, which we checked mark on the first page. So this is nothing crazy. It's just that your first project is running off Ktar. This is as simple as running or creating a new project in Android Studio. That's how it works here as well. Now, if you open the application file, the application project, you would see this code being there, right? So in this code, what you would see is, you would see a function main. It's pretty similar how we write in Kotlin, everything, right? Then there's a function again of embedded server. So if you go back, you see here, the local host URLs are 0000 and the port is 8080. In the same way, you would see the server. We selected Netty, if you remember when we created the project. You can select Jetty as well, and there are other couple of options, but Netty is the fastest they have. Then compare this. We have 8080 as a port. There's the port we have selected, and the host is 0000. So we have a host by default created here as well. So you can change it for the local purposes, yes, but that's how you have it. Then we have a function of configure routing, right? I'll be explaining that. I'll be showing that how does this look. And we have an extension function attached to it known as start. So when you say start, right, it just waits for a certain time and it just starts itself. So an extension function is also attached here. So basically, if you see in the hindsight, all the Kotlin properties are being attached. So if I go back to a bit, you see I just opened a URL. There's nothing after that slash something. It's just hello world. So that is basically an empty route for me, which opens a hello world. Here, that empty route is basically defined in configure routing. Now, let's see what configure routing does for us. Again, it's an extension function. So if you go back, you would see this whole embedded server. That whole block of code gives us an application out of the box. So now this configure routing is nothing but an extension function for that application, which we have created in our routing file or package, whatever you want to say this, routing package, right? Now, this is my configure routing. Inside that, we have a DSL opening of routing, and whatever we route, like write it in this route, right? For now, it's get slash nothing else, and it says call.respond text, which is hello world, which you saw on the output screen of your Google Chrome. So I'll explain it line by line. This routing basically means all the routes which we are going to define in the project has to go inside that specific block. And it can be in a modular way as well. I have a lot of content for that, but for now, very early or the basic step, if you see this routing has to come and speak up for all the routes there. So for now, there's only one route, which says get. I'll explain this verb again in the future, but just understand to get, it basically means I want to show a user something. So this is a route which is called by a client. For example, using a retrofit, you are calling this route of 0000.8080, right? And you're calling this route. He or she would receive a text, right? So he is getting it, and this is the response of getting it. So just don't worry about these verbs right now. I'll be explaining it, but just understand the configure routing is an application extension function which registers all the routing there. It's basically a register to register all the routes we have in our project. Now, you saw get as a verb, but there are a lot of different verbs going around. I'll speak out a couple of them, which are generally like the most used ones. So first one is get. So I'll be talking in the terms of a client, consider as an Android application, and your server, which we are discussing right now. So this is like a discussion between these two. So consider a verb as like a code word, or so to explain it in a very better way, a friend of mine has explained me this. Consider there are two best friends, A and B. They have a code word to discuss so that others don't understand what they're discussing, right? Consider that code word as HTTP words, and these two best friend A and B as the client and the servers. So when the client says that, okay, I need this thing from you, right? I need something. Then he would always use get. Android says I need user profile data. It's a get. User says I need the city data. It's a get. If a user says something else that I need it, please give it to me. It's a get always. Now, that's one of the requests. Second is post. These are the two you would be using the most in your project. So what's a post? Post is like sending something from the client to the other side of it, like the server. Using post, you say, okay, I have this user data with me. I did a Google login and stuff. I have this. What should I do it? What we should do is we should create a new user, right? So I'm taking this data and I'm throwing it to the server. So like take this out and give it to the server and tell the server, please give me an acknowledgement that you have it. It's more like an handshake rule. Now, if you try in a very basic way, you in a restaurant go to your waiter and say, okay, I have had my food and I have paid you my money, right? That's a post request. You have paid the money, but as an acknowledgement, you need something. You take the bill with you of the payment confirmation of your credit card, correct? So that's more like an explanation that I give you something, you store it with yourself, but just give me a confirmation. That's a post request. Whenever you do a post, it's basically like you are creating a new entry in the database. In a very overview or a generic level, you create a new entry every time you use post if all the evaluating criteria matches yourself. Then we have delete. I'm not going to explain this, but this basically means you're going to delete a certain entry which a server has and you want it to be deleted as a request which is being fired from the client. Cool. Now, after that, we have this put or patch. Generally, both of them work in a very similar fashion, but put or patch basically works that you have certain level of data which you might have entered manually on the server side, or you might have used the post request to enter it. Now, you want to edit something. Consider you have a user profile and it was created 2 years back. When, like for example, mine, I was 25 years old 2 years back. Now I'm 27. So I want that app to update my age here. So I will just reflect it on my device. I would not reflect it on the server. What my client or the application or the device would do is it would fire up a put request or a patch request and go and specifically edit certain set of data. So put and patch can update an existing data which a server has. So that's how you would explain this verbs. So I hope now you understand this thing, that when we were getting a data, client said, I need a certain level of data from this route. The route here is this slash, correct? So it got a hello world text as a response. So this is how what I want to explain you in a verb side. So now explain this in the REST API, right? I have this client, which is my Android application, iOS application, web, whichever the customer faces, it uses a certain verb as a code word and fires up a request to the server. That's how this RESTful API works, like basically an API works, right? Or any communication with the server. And the server gets back to the client saying, okay, this is the data I have, please work with it. Or this is the acknowledgement I have, please work with it. That's how this communication works from the client to the server, right? And the verbs are get, post, delete, whatever you want to use that suits your bill right now. Now, that was more of a generic in the backend side of it. Now let's discuss features. And by this, I don't mean any of the features of any hardware, Kotlin, something. These features are something like the routing which we used, right? So features are were known as plugins by Ktar, but now they are features as per the new naming convention. Now, the definition, set of pre-coded plugins that can help you build faster. That's what I sort of mentioned, right? That I don't want to write everything which is mandatory by the project. Let's say an authentication. If Ktar comes up and says, okay, I have this for you, please use it, correct? Why won't I use it? Why would I build something from zero? That's what library does, right? That if you have something, you just use it and don't write it again and again. That's basically the use of a library. Consider features as a library of Ktar in your project, right? That's what we are going to discuss. So consider this an extension function again of application module. So if you remember, we had a similar context and the text for application.configure routing, right? You can install any sort of feature by installing compression, installing JSON, installing content negotiation, any type of feature you want to use. Mind that any library which you are integrating, you also need to implement the library in the Gradle file. That was something I'm skipping here because I expect you to understand that you have to add a library in the Gradle file as well. How you do for Android? So it's pretty simple. But if you have to install any feature, you have to install it using this. Install compression, install something, install that. This install keyword is basically used to install your features or the plugins which Ktor has. Now, if you remember it correctly, in Android, everything is basically like serializing, deserializing and stuff. So in Ktor, if I have to serialize and deserialize, I have a lot of options. We have basically Kotlin serialization pre-built into Ktor, but just for the context of understanding for you, me, and everybody, we have been using JSON as one of the oldest libraries in Android. So when I say JSON, JSON is the best, right? So this is how you install it. Content negotiation is basically a feature which tells you cool, you can use me to serialize it, but I can just serialize it for you. But in what context do you want to be serialized or deserialized? That context comes with JSON. If you don't want JSON, you can use Kotlin serialization still. But if you want to use JSON, you can replace JSON with JSON here, and that's perfectly fine. I'm just explaining how you install a feature, right? And why I'm explaining you this is Kotlin content negotiation is, if you remember from the GET request, when we were displaying a hello world, we were just responding a text, respond text, right? But if you remember from your client side of usage of Android, you basically use, what do you say in that context? JSONs, right? That you need JSONs and you render it somewhere. You don't need a text. So when you plug a JSON, it's basically that JSON is mapped to a data class. That data class is basically serialized or deserialized, whatever, with JSON or whatever you use, maybe Moshi. But that's how you use it, right? So consider if I, on my Ktor side, have to take a JSON response, which you guys might fire from your request. Let's say a body request from Postman or your client. I have to take that JSON. I have to serialize it according to my data class of a user. Let's say a user has an ID, a name, and maybe an age, something. And I have to take that JSON block from Postman, and I have to map it to my data class, right, of a user which I might have created. That's where my JSON comes in, and that is where content negotiation feature comes in the picture. So to give you a basic example, let's say I have to create a user. A user has a name and age and ID. So this one, right? So remember this, I have to create a new entry in my backend side. So I mentioned it to you, it would be a post request. If you have to add an entry, it's a post. So consider a user passing a data file or JSON file from the client saying, okay, I have a name, let's say Himanshu, and I have an age, let's say 27. That's what user class here defines. So if you want to receive that block, that data block, we basically use this call.receive. This call.receive, what it does, it receives the body request which we come from the client side, and it gets it as a, and it sets the variable, right? Now we use that to serialize it. So that serialization of here has to work. So if you see, I have taken that block of JSON and I have mapped it to the user. This mapping would actually be done because we have predefined content negotiation before declaring this route. So this has to come in sequence, that first the content negotiation has to be done, then you have to define the routes below that. You can't just define the route first and content negotiation, because what would happen is all the routes which are declared after content negotiation would work fine, but this would not work fine. So to receive a body request, we use call.receive and whatever you want to do. Now, what I want to do is I just want to respond back to the user that I have it. So here I'm not responding call response text. I'm using call.respond. This respond can be used to respond anything to the user. It's not a text. Now it would return you as a JSON on the client side, right? That's how we do it. Now, this is what we were doing to receive a body request from the client from the postman. Call.receive of a user type. But what was the request which was being fired from the client to the postman? This was the request, right? We had a name, we had an age, and it can have a value, but this is more of a structure what I'm trying to show. This is a JSON which we are trying to pass on the postman, and this comes up. Now, what is this? If you understand or if you communicate with your backend engineers, it's more like do a body request, give me a raw response. pass it in the body. This is the three terms you would see frequently when you're doing a post request. Backend engineers basically communicate you in this term that, okay, we have to do this body request. So this is what backend engineers mean by body request, that on the client end side, you have to add this on the body. And for the backend engineers or the KTOR engineers, I would say that way, call.receive is the way you get that body into your code, right? So that's how. So okay, now you know how you can communicate with your client engineers if you have started building your backend applications. That this is, you would say, okay, just pass it in the body and you call it via call.receive. That's the way how you has to be done, right? Now, if you see here, we are not passing the ID in the the request. We are just giving name and age. But where we are getting the ID is, if you see in the second line, this one, user equal to request body, this body dot copy ID. I'm passing total user size +1. What I'm meaning by this is the total number of users I have +1. This is not a production level code, sorry, but this is just for an example. So the ID, I'm assigning it here, and I'm not specifically asking a user to pass. That's something a backend engineer's job to do. You can't expect a client engineer to assign an ID to you. So that's what. Then we have users.add. This is actually acting as a list for now, or a map in that way, but in a very production heavy environment, this would be a service class which would ask users to be added there, and that would be added to the backend services, right? But for now, for better understanding, I've added a list which you add this user to the list and this responds the success response to the user. That's pretty much what you are going to do here. So we are just passing the name and age, and ID we are assigning it here directly. Now, this is a very good example of a website, right? URL, sorry. So generally, if you go to google.com/search, you're trying to search something. And let's say if you type HTTP and just press enter, you would see this URL being fired up. So what's unique in this? This is pretty much the same, right? So if you remember in our previous hello world example, what we basically did was we had 0.0.0.0 colon 8080. That was our base URL. What base URL basically means is this is a URL, and all the routes we are going to define in routing will work after that. So in this case, if you see, www.google.com is basically the base URL, and the routing or the route is /search. After that, just skip it, but just focus till search, right? That google.com is the base URL. All the routes we are going to define is going to be attached to this base URL of the project, and /search basically means that's the route we are going to define or execute all our tasks at. Now, if you see this q is equal to HTTP, this is basically, and again, in the terms of terminologies, it is called a query parameter. Again, your backend engineer come up to a client engineer and say, okay, what you think, what we don't need a body request here, we need a query parameter. So this query parameter always starts with q is equals HTTP. So basically this question mark, if you see here, that's how you start it. Query is this q, this is the value which I'm passing, right? It can be anything. It can be name is equals to Himanshu as well. But for Google, it's q is equals to HTTP, right? So that's how this means. So I have shown you that in KTOR, how can you get a body request? But one of the most important thing is you also need to know how can you get a query parameter. You can build an API which takes a user ID as a query and do a certain functionalities. You might not want everything to be passed on the body. So how would you do that? So here, if you see, we have q as a key, I would say, and the value is HTTP. So to get a query parameter, what we can do is we can use call.request.query parameters. Query parameters could be multiple in number. So for now, what I need is for the queue. So it basically gives me a map, a hash map kind of stuff, where we have n number of query parameters. But what I am interested in is the queue, because it gives me an HTTP, right? So that's basically how you get a query parameter. So what you have understood till now is we have a body request parameter coming out. We have a query parameter coming out. So I'll give you a very good example of it. Let's say you want to delete a user from your database. A client has to file a request. And what you would do is you would have a delete API with the verb delete and not post. When you pass this as delete and you pass the user ID in the query, if you remember from the retrofit term, @query, and if you pass it as a user ID, what you would do is val ID is equal to call.request.query parameters, and inside the quotes you would pass user ID or ID, something which the username is there, right? But that's how you would pass. You would take that ID and perform your task in your service class of deleting the user or marking is deleted as true, something, whatever you want to do. That's how a query parameter works. So this is very important to understand as well. And if you see, it's very convenient for us to understand as well, because we have been using this for Android, and it's just we are using Kotlin here. We don't even think this as of any big thing, because frankly, I was doing backend with Golang a lot. It became a challenge for me because I had to understand Kotlin, I had to understand Go. Now with Kotlin into the picture for backend, it's very easy, because if I understand what Kotlin latest updates have been doing in backend, for example, I know what I can do in Android as well. So it's a mixture of it, right? Now, this is basically justifying how you get a query param. That's it. Now, let's discuss one last thing which we have, not last, but one of the important features, right? So if I go back in this one, you see we have a parameter, let's say 0.0.0.0 and a port of 8080. And then we have a base URL of /user, correct? So every time we are creating a route, we are passing a hard-coded string user. But this is where location comes in. So location, basically what it does, it helps you create a data class, for example, and you have to annotate it with location. When you annotate something with @location, what it does, it asks you for like a URL, which we are giving it /user. Here what we are doing is /list /name/page/page. So this basically means we need a name, we need a page to even make this work, right? So we just describe it as listing, and here we have the parameters in the data class. So now in place of /users, you just pass the response here, listing, right? Now if you see here in the GET request, you are not passing what do you say that a raw string, for example, /user or /something like that. We are just passing a listing, a data class which we created here, and this basically justifies that they know what you have to call. And if you remember, we have this variables name and page which is being mapped here. So a tip here is you have to specify the same name. It's not a tip, but it's a rule, but you just remember the spelling has to be correct. If it's wrong, it would not map itself. Now, here you see when you call the URL, it would be like more like, let's say, /name/Himanshu /page/1. So now when I open this URL, it would say listing Himanshu, page 1. That's how the location thing works, right? That's basically an advanced mechanism, I would say, of how to do it, right? An advanced static way of creating routes. It's not a dynamic one, but you can create a class of location and you can just pass that location everywhere. That's how you do it. Now, the last topic for this is a status page. So a status page is more like, I would say, as an exceptional handler for Ktor. It's a global exception handler for Ktor. So what I mean by this is, consider you're doing an API call. For example, this one, right? There might be a certain exception which, for example, let's say this is a route where an authentication is required, but without authentication, you are responding it with, you're calling this API. So it goes, it would not work because it requires authentication, but you're not passing the authentication token. So it would throw an exception, like unauthorized exception. But for that, you might have to write it here that if HTTP status code is unauthorized, respond this. that might work fine for you, right? Because that's a single API. But consider on a production environment, you might have hundreds of APIs. And you can't keep on writing all the custom exceptions being thrown there again and again here. That is where a status page comes in. So a status page is like a global exception handler. What it does, it responds to the user with any failure state or an exception. It can be a failure state of unauthorized exception, bad request, a bad URL formation, anything. If you have it, it would respond and you don't have to plug it in every route you have, right? You just have to do it individually at one place and it would handle everywhere. So first thing first, you have to install it because it's a feature. So we install status pages. Now we create an exception. We say if there's a throwable coming out, right? We just call it exception of type throwable and we respond this. Now, if in any API call, anyone, right, there is a throwable generating, it would respond this by default. It would not have to handle in that specific route. So that's what the benefit is. If you want, you can add custom exceptions. Let's say an exception of unauthorized exception. You create a data class of unauthorized exception and you pass a custom response. Called a response is you're unauthorized to view this request. And just throw that an exception in the route that, okay, this is not working, throw this. And whenever the status page understand that this has been thrown or this exception has been thrown, right? I'll just call this up and I'll call it from this block where we have done it. So that's basically the status page of exception handling. And I think that's pretty much it on the topic. So couple of suggestions, I would say, why I think this is a good option. Why use it as an Android developer? So initially, I would not recommend if you're starting your career in Android engineering or something, some other engineering as well, that don't just do this and that. First, give an ample amount of time for yourself in Android engineering and build your career in it. Then start exploring multiple ecosystem because now you are growing, and when you grow, you need to understand different aspects of engineering, not just Android. So that's the reason I recommend people to do it. But also there's a lot of other options of picking Kotlin as a backend engineering language is because you have an understanding of Kotlin already, because since you're an Android developer, then Ktor supports majority of JVM libraries, how you saw for JSON, right? It has it, correct? And as well as if you understand Ktor, you can use it for building multi-platform applications because that's what people basically use. It's very small and very quick to learn because you have the context of coroutines, you know Kotlin, you know other stuff of Kotlin going around. It's very easy to pick up. And as I mentioned, it helps you with KMM, right? And the best part is it makes you a full stack developer. So sometimes it happens that you don't understand what's happening and what backend guys have communicated to you. So now with the understanding backend technologies, not with Ktor specific, but anything you want to love or you love or you want to do, maybe JavaScript. But if you understand backend engineering as well, it makes you a full stack. So you have a knowledge to build a client Android application, and you have a knowledge to build a backend app, right? So now you have a full stack knowledge, and now you can call yourself full stack developer. And I don't understand what's an Android full stack developer, but this is what I call them, a full stack developer, right? So to summarize what we did, right? We are basically using Kotlin to do anything. That's basically the summary. We are using it for building applications. We are using it to, what do you say? We are using it for some other stuff like backend, for front end and stuff. But basically we're using Kotlin, right? And we are building our own routes. So why I specifically mentioned this is because now you can pick this up. You can build your own application. You can host it on maybe DigitalOcean or somewhere and just play around with your custom projects. This is the best way to do it. And with this, I think I'm done. Thank you so much. And I'll pick up questions if any.
Sure. That was really insightful, and I think we had a lot of Android developers today who were seeing Ktor out for the first time, and it was really wonderfully explained. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
We also have quite a few questions since
Yeah.
I'm guessing a lot of these were Android developers who tried Ktor for the first time. So if you have any more questions, please feel free to put them on slido.com and enter the code KTMUM. You don't require login to ask any questions. The first question we have is, can we deploy Ktor on cloud functions such as Firebase or such as our Firebase?
I think it's the early stages of that is either deprecated or it's in alpha. Somehow, I'm not sure, but you can deploy it on Firebase.
Chintan, would you like to take the next question?
Yeah, sure. So like next question is like, how do we hide API key in Ktor?
Okay, so if you remember the configuration file which we used when we created the project, that is where you use the configuration file to hide it. And generally, when you push it to some system or somewhere, you don't push that whole generated file. You just use either the environment variables to use it or something else, but you don't push that file.
This one is, can I host the Kotlin backend for free? In part, you have already answered this since it's on Firebase, but if you would like to add anything.
But Firebase becomes costly, I would say, in that way, but very quickly, even if no time. But if I have to put it in this way, you have EC2 instance of Amazon, which is free for a year. Even if you don't want to try for EC2, there is the best possible option. I don't remember the name. Heroku.
Yeah, Heroku.
Yeah. Heroku is very cheap and it's very fast to deploy. It's just like pushing your code. So try that.
Yeah, so next question is Ktor obsolete. Like, please note that this plugin is okay. So this is someone is sharing information. So I guess this is not a question.
I think this one is about
that. I'll just give one line.
Deprecated.
Yeah, I'll just give. So it's not deprecated. The basic thing what these guys did, JetBrains, was they removed Ktor from the community edition of IntelliJ, and they put it in the ultimate edition only. So that's the reason it's obsolete.
A follow-up question to this. Wouldn't it be the same using start.ktor.io on the web browser?
Yeah, it's the same. It should be the same.
Got it. So probably people can use it if anyone's on community edition. We had quite a few people using community edition in the chat, so probably you can use that. Next one is a quite common question. Is it stable and can I use it in production?
Yes, definitely. I have been using it for ages now, I think. Like at least for a year, I've been using it and it's done.
Okay. Yeah. So next question is, does Ktor allow open tracing?
I'm not sure about that. Can't say. I'm not sure, so I can't. I have to check and get back to you on this. But I think there is a feature for open tracing or something, but I can't comment on that yet.
Great.
Next up, we have, can Ktor generate open API specifications like Swagger?
So it has a Swagger, a feature for itself to start documenting for Swagger for yourself.
Got it.
What is the common app architecture used in Ktor pattern?
I would say there's no such common pattern. What I have been doing is I've been building it with a clean architectural setup, everything in their own single responsibility kind of thing. So that works for me, but there's a number of ways you can experiment it with.
Okay.
And next up we have, is there some plugin to use Firebase Authenticator, or should I just wrap around Java Firebase add?
If I mentioned it earlier, there is a authentication OAuth feature which you can use to implement it. So I have done it in my project. You can do it.
Got it.
So is there a Ktor API for cloud functions? So
again,
maybe, yeah, it's talking about serverless something.
Yeah, serverless. So there is serverless thing, but I'm not specifying. Like I'm not sure about what exactly you mean by this.
Okay.
Yeah, probably if you have asked this, you can clarify more in the chat. How does Ktor work with GraalVM in cloud?
So if I'm not wrong, it works with some jar specifications where you have to push it in GraalVM, but again, not use it. So. But we can build applications using GraalVM and deploy it in the cloud. Oh yes, for this, there is a company called Zolando. We in Clue use it. So we have been using it extensively and we have a like 12 crore daily active count. So it's already there in production.
Great.
Next up, we have any major advantage of Ktor over Spring Boot. I think one you already mentioned was lightweight. But
lightweighted. Second is Kotlin and Ktor is by the same company, JetBrains. So they have this correlation in a very smoother way. But Spring Boot is tried and tested, but it's very heavy.
Okay. So if we opt into learning Ktor with Kotlin, since we know Android earlier, does that also give us good idea about how things are handled in other backend frameworks?
Oh yes, definitely. See, you're just understanding how backend works. You're not understanding how Ktor works. So if when you have the idea of how backend engineering actually works, it doesn't matter if you are doing with Express or if you're doing with anything else. You just know it's there. You can do it.
Got it. I'll probably skip this question. You already answered it. It's in the previous question. Any recommended architecture for backend app with Kotlin, in your opinion?
I'll share my repo if I don't know. I've not added that in my slide, but I used generally the clean architectural setup. So that's the best way I have been following, either it be Android. So my architecture style is never platform dependent. It's always platform agnostic. Either it be Android, iOS, or backend. It has to be the same across everywhere. So.
Got it. So we'll also share one of the links given to us by Himanshu on the meetup. So you should be getting it on your emails soon.
Sure. So
okay,
for Ktor, I'll just okay. Go ahead if you want to share because
that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, sure.
Sorry. For this, Ktor recommends to use an embedded server for building application because it's less memory consuming for them. Okay, great.
So how to use Kotlin backend with SQL, like MySQL, I say.
Okay. It's just like a database layer which you want to use. If you remember from the project, I used a list to add the users. If you are using some sort of, let's say, a database architecture, MongoDB, SQL, or Postgres, you just need to look at everything and add your SQL. It doesn't matter what you use for the database layer; it works properly fine.
Okay. Okay.
Next up, we have: is it easy to use with Firestore or real-time DB?
It should be. I don't see why it should not be, but again, as a caution, it becomes costly very soon. So I tried it and I know this for sure.
Okay.
Probably like in Java, we used to use the admin SDK, Firebase admin SDK.
Firebase. Yes.
One server side, it should work in this too.
So they have a very good library for Firebase, so you can use it directly.
Okay. When to choose which engine? Like what's criteria behind choosing engine from Netty, Jetty, or CIO?
Okay, so Netty is the recommended way. It's the most stable which Ktor has. Jetty and CIO are a bit heavy in the Apache clients. So Ktor and JetBrains recommend you to use Netty. But when you have no idea how to choose one, just go with the default. That's what they mentioned in the doc as well.
How do we set up microservices in Ktor, any GitHub resource?
You would find that in my GitHub. I'll have that. So rather than explain, you can just check that out.
Good. Yeah, is sequence of route important? Example, if I put get start put before get flash, is it important?
No, it's not important, but it's not it's not a recommended way to do it. You should specify it. Yes, answer.
I think you already covered all of this,
yes.
Real-time and fast. This is an interesting question. Any production level app which uses Ktor? You mentioned some of them.
Zolando. We at Clue use Ktor and Kotlin.
How do we do cron jobs in Ktor?
We have a feature already in Ktor of doing a cron job, and they're also improving it a lot. So they have a new cron job feature coming out for Ktor again.
How to host an app engine using GCP?
Okay. So in GCP, there's a console for specific Ktor and Kotlin projects. So if you just use it, you can do it. But it's a very pain to set up the whole thing initially. But after once you have set up, it's work fine.
Probably some of the audience can also take a look at a tutorial on the Ktor's website. They have a clean tutorial to do this.
Yeah. Can we make a real-time application like WhatsApp clone using WebSocket in Ktor, or is there any memory database support for Ktor?
Okay, so if you're using WebSocket, again, Ktor has a feature for WebSocket, just how we have for routing. But again, there is an in-memory database support for Redis in memory as well. So you can build it. I didn't use WhatsApp. I built a WhatsApp phone using Firebase for Ktor. So it's possible if that's what you're asking.
I think this is also covered about which architecture fits well, so I'll probably skip this. What about database connectivity? Because this is also part of.
So one of the best libraries, I would say, the database they have. I don't remember the name. Maybe Shreyas can add, but they have like JetBrains has a library which works with the Kotlin projects and Java projects as well.
Yeah, Exposed is an ORM, and also SQLite is a way which we can skip ORMs.
But there is one community database, I guess, KMongo. So what KMongo does, it's a Mongo wrapper which gives you the coroutine support out of the box. So it's more like the retrofit for Android for us. It's a third-party thing, but it's a stable one. In similar way, KMongo is the one if you want to use it.
Okay. Someone in chat has also shared KTOM something.
KTOM, yeah, but that's still in the budding phase. It's not yet stable enough to be used. Yeah. SQLite is amazing.
Someone asked, is there any small open source project to learn Ktor? I think Himanshu already shared his GitHub in the chat. Audience can take a look at those.
So what are the use cases in which Ktor should not be used as backend? Like Spring Boot should be preferred over Ktor in some cases.
See, Spring Boot has matured like in the whole decade itself. So if you are a bit more like an Avenger kind of a thing and you want to be more challenging, go with Ktor. If you want a very stable product, see, this is the technical decision rather than your personal preference when you have to select it. So you need to see if your team or if you want to invest your time in learning Ktor. If you know Spring Boot, please go ahead with it because it saves a lot of time.
How to deploy? Do we have to make jar file like in Java?
Yes, jar.
Okay. Can PostgreSQL database API be populated with Ktor application syntax that can run parallelly with Android IAM enabled in a GCP for one receive function?
No idea. But you can populate Postgres database. That's something I know. But parallel is something I don't know.
So should I be using IntelliJ Ultimate only for building Ktor applications?
No.
I think you can answer this.
Community is also fine. Just the one is you would not get Ktor plugin, which you can get it from the other source, star.ktor.
Okay.
Another interesting question.
When not to use Ktor?
When you don't want to, if you know something else, that's totally fine. But if you want to experiment, please go ahead.
Great. Yeah, so I guess that's all the question we had for today. I guess all the Android developers who attended the meetup and other developers who also attended may got an idea how we can use Kotlin for backend engineering. So it's like, as Himanshu mentioned, like every Android developer can become a full stack developer if you know Kotlin for backend also.